Hello and welcome to Stretford Paddock. This is a one-on-one interview. My name is Joe and we are joined once again at the opening of the transfer window by Dharmesh Sheth, Sky Sports news reporter. It's great to have you back on. So much to look forward to, so much to get into. United are going to spend hundreds of millions. We're going to revamp the whole squad. It's going to be fantastic. First of all though, how are you, Dharmesh? How are you doing?
Bit too much to drink over Christmas, was it, Joe? I don't think that's going to be the case. No, I'm very well, thank you very much. I can't believe it's just come around so quickly again. I was talking about it being like 120 or 130 days, however long it was, since the end of August, and here we are, beginning of January.
We're back.
Go again.
There's loads going on. And weirdly, though, like you said, it may not be big money, big signings, but it does look as though United are trying to get some things done this window based on the sort of reports and rumours that we've seen. So we're going to get to some of the incomings, which I think are probably more exciting in a few minutes. But before that, some of the more sort of concrete rumours that we've seen. The first one is this one with Raphael Varane. Now, the word seemed to come out that United won't be extending his current deal, which I think a lot of people then flooded to, oh my God, Varane's leaving. But actually, there's a bit more nuance to it than that, isn't there?
Yeah, when you say extend his current deal, because Manchester United hold a 1-year option on Raphael Varane's contract. So he's entered the final 6 months of his contract. Now, it's very unlikely, as it stands, it should be said here, that Manchester United will trigger that 1-year extension. That doesn't necessarily mean that Raphael Varane will leave Manchester United in the summer. Yes, of course it can happen. What it does mean is, as of yesterday, he is free to talk to clubs outside England over a pre-contract agreement. But against the backdrop of that, Manchester United are still in talks with Raphael Varane over a new contract. So the way this would work is rather like the situation you had with David De Gea, because we know that David De Gea and Raphael Varane, when they signed their last contracts, they were on huge money. So Manchester United didn't want to extend that trigger or trigger that 1-year extension on those current terms. Now, people would ask them, why would Raphael Varane even consider staying at United and extending his contract if he's going to be on lower terms? Well, number one, he's into his 30s now. Is he going to get that much money if he wants to stay in European football? Potentially you could get that money in Saudi Arabia, of course. It's very unlikely he's going to get that much money a week if he goes within Europe now. And also it might represent a bit more stability for him if he can agree a new contract with Manchester United beyond the 1-year contract extension that there would have been had Manchester United triggered it on the current terms. But I think there is a bit of trying to extend it further involved in this, but also, you know, Manchester United don't want to be in a position where they're paying their players, you know, huge sums of money anymore. I think they're trying to leave those days behind them, hence why they don't want to extend on the current terms. So as it stands, I think the talks are continuing between United and Varane over a new contract, but as it stands, they won't be triggering that extension.
There's been loads of rumours. I think this sort of started around the sort of Man City game, where obviously Varane didn't play and Ten Hag came out and said it was a tactical thing rather than an injury thing. And there's been rumours since then of a falling out between him and Ten Hag. Then obviously now, due to injuries maybe, or maybe due to something else, Varane's been back in the starting lineup again. Varane started pretty much every single game that he and Martinez were fit last season, which was most of the games. Is there any truth to this sort of falling out? And also, why has he fallen out of favour if not? Because I know he said about, he don't like playing Maguire on the right and all that, but, you know, Raphael Varane's been pretty excellent pretty much every game he's ever played for United. I know he's had a couple of mediocre matches, but generally speaking, you can rely on him. Is there any truth to it? And if there isn't, why do you think he hasn't been playing as much this season?
I think recently now he has, as you would have seen with the team selection. So maybe that is down to injury, but I think Erik Ten Hag has always said, you know, he'll pick the players he believes are on form and for that game. Now, to his credit, you know, we thought Harry Maguire was going to leave Manchester United in the summer. It looked like it was happening. It didn't look like he was in the plans. But in fairness to Maguire, he kept his head down. He worked hard. He forced his way back into the team. And then Erik Ten Hag said, I'm going to pick the players who I think are on form. And he obviously thought at the time, on the face of it, I'm just looking at on the face of it, that Harry Maguire and other were a better bet at that time than Raphael Varane. Now, we can talk till we're blue whether we think that was the right decision to make because of United's results. But you could also argue that even with Varane in the team, the inconsistency of Manchester United hasn't disappeared. And I think that's a lot to do with the injuries that they've suffered throughout the team. With regard to a falling out, it hasn't been made public if there has been, because, Raphael Varane, to his credit as well, hasn't said anything. He hasn't been public about when he's been dropped or, for tactical reasons not being picked in the Manchester United lineup. But from everything that we see and from everything that we hear from Erik ten Hag, there doesn't seem to have been any issue on a personal level. It looks like, on the face of it, that it is an issue on team selection and performance. And of late, he's decided, no, Raphael Varane is ready. He is the player that I want to pick. And it'll be interesting to see what will happen once all of the defenders are back. We were talking, you just mentioned it there, Lisandro Martinez and Raphael Varane were the first choice centre-backs last season. When Martinez is back, we think mid-January, is he going to resume that pairing, or is he going to put Lisandro Martinez with somebody else? That's probably when we'll get a better idea of whether Raphael Varane will be at Manchester United next season or not.
That's a good point. Moving on to another player then, who seems sort of almost twinned with Varane just because of their previous club. Casemiro also came in for big money. Also has had a bit of sort of speculation about his future. He's another one where he's never really been dropped, but he's not played through injury for the last few months. And during this absence, we've started to hear again rumours circulating of a potential move to Saudi, a potential move elsewhere. Do you see anything in that? Because, I mean, from my perspective, obviously not as informed as you are behind the scenes on these things, when he's fit, he's one of the first names on the team sheet for Manchester United. Do you see any movement with that?
I'm sure there'll be interest in Casemiro as a fantastic player, but everything that Erik ten Hag is saying about Casemiro is this: he's coming back in mid-January. He talks about how Manchester United will be playing more like he wants them to play, and he believes results will improve when these injured players return. Yeah. So there's no talk about Casemiro publicly, at least, about, well, we're going to see if we can do business in January. There's no pressure really compared to the Varane situation with Manchester United and Casemiro, though, because he's still got another 2.5 years left on his contract. Add to that, Manchester United can trigger the 1-year option in that contract as well. Admittedly, you've got that situation where he will be on big money as well. So maybe the Casemiro situation will come to a head in the summer. I don't think Erik ten Hag wants to be in a position where he's had all of these injuries in the midfield, in the central defence, where he's thinking Varane and Casemiro can leave in January, because that could really hamstring him for the rest of this season. So I think the Varane one is of more importance than Casemiro just now, simply because of the contract situation, and there's no pressure for United to let go of Casemiro or sell Casemiro in this transfer window, and I don't see that happening unless something incredible was to happen. But in January, you don't really see those kind of deals happening.
Okay. Just moving on to some ins then. Before we get to specific names, obviously we've seen Jim Ratcliffe have that deal sort of confirmed now. We're going through the process of, fit and proper owners tests and all that, which would be hugely ironic if he wasn't allowed to own Man United, but the Glazers were, the way they took over the club. But we don't expect any complications there, I don't think. There's talk of this $300 million or 250 or so million pounds. Initially, what I saw and what was reported was this is for sort of redevelopment of things, stadium, training ground, infrastructure stuff that doesn't really apply to FFP the same way. Yeah. Then there was a report, and the Telegraph, I believe it was, or certain other people as well, have hinted that maybe some of this could be used for transfers and for getting extra players in. What's your understanding of that? And do you think, would it be too early to use any of that money in January? They've not officially been confirmed yet. Is it for transfers? Is it for stadium? Is it for a bit of both? What's going on with that?
Well, it hasn't been fully ratified by the Premier League yet. That might not happen until after the transfer window shuts. So this conversation will be redundant anyway. But with regard to the money and where it can be spent, I think you've hit the nail on the head there, because just because a club gets an influx of money through investment in the football club, it doesn't change FFP and profit and sustainability rules. So Manchester United will still be operating under those rules. Now, I think every club goes into a new season and they don't say we want to go big in January. That's not the mentality that they have. They want to get all of their business done in the summer. Manchester United spent big money in the summer, as they did in the previous summer. And if you look at what happened in January, it was more the loan market when Erik ten Hag wanted to reinforce. And if you look at the back end of the summer transfer window even as well, you could feel the FFP and operating within FFP, that was starting to kick in already as well, because you had that situation right in the final week and in the final hours of the window where Sofian Amrabat and Sergio Reguilon came into the football club, and Altay Bayindir. Bayindir, admittedly, yes, was a permanent signing, but he only cost about £5 million, whereas the other two players, they were loans. Amrabat was a loan with an option at the end of the season. Reguilon's loan actually came with a break clause in this January transfer window. So I think if United are to bring in players, they might need to operate once more in the loan market, unless a long-term target becomes available. Now, this is always the caveat. They will always find money for a long-term target. Say, for example, they've got someone in their mind that they've been chasing for a while and they think that they can do it in the summer window of 2024. If that player suddenly became available in the January transfer window at a price that Manchester United could do, because then they would then be taking the budget from the summer window on that player because they believe him to be a long-term target, then, you know, there is a situation where they would be able to do that. But long-term targets are usually very, very good players who are placed usually at very, very good clubs, who usually are involved in title races or European football, which means that the selling club are quite loath or reticent to do business in the middle of a season. So that's, you know, probably by circumstance why United will, if they want to bring players in, will probably deal in the loan market if they are to do any business.
So not the 300 million spent on players in January that I was hoping.
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. I think the way that it's worked, you can use it on, you know, developing the infrastructure of your training ground and your stadium. But the profit and sustainability and FFP rules dictate that, you know, you need to be spending within your means. So just because you've got this huge amount of money that's come into the club, it doesn't automatically mean, right, you can go and spend £150 million in January. It doesn't work like that, I don't think.
Okay. Just in terms of specifics, you mentioned the loan market there. It feels like a striker is needed. Just the number of goals United have scored this season, we're averaging about one a game, which is just ridiculous, really. I think we've got the second or third least goals scored this season so far in the Premier League. Is there any movement in terms of strikers? We've seen certain names such as Timo Werner, Choupo-Moting's been mentioned this morning as well, Thomas Muller, another one. Do you think United are actively looking to bring a striker in, even if it is on loan?
If you go back to the summer, I think they wanted to bring in two strikers. Yeah. And I don't think they wanted to be in a position where a 20-year-old Rasmus Højlund was going to come into Old Trafford and burden and shoulder the burden of responsibility of you know, scoring all of these goals. So, you know, he's come under a lot of criticism, but I think that in some quarters there's a lot of sympathy for Rasmus Højlund as well, because I think what Erik ten Hag in an ideal world would have wanted to do was to brought in an experienced striker. I know we talked about Harry Kane, but I don't know how possible it would have been to have got Harry Kane and Rasmus Højlund in the same transfer window. But just for argument's sake, they wanted to bring in an experienced striker, and then Højlund would just be drip fed into the squad. You know, a substitute appearance here, a substitute appearance there, starting in some of the League Cup ties potentially, and then being allowed to bed himself in and then start games on a regular basis. Whereas he came to the club, he was slightly injured, he barely had a pre-season, and when he did come into the team, it was just like, right, here's the saviour. Here's the guy who's going to be sorting it out for Manchester United. Got to remember, it's a new league for him. It's he's 20 years old. He's barely played, you know, high-level, top-level European football before. So I think it was a little bit unfair to put all of that responsibility on his shoulders. But that's where Manchester United are just now. And I just believe that maybe with all of these names being linked, you've got as you mentioned, Choupo-Moting, who's been linked with United before. Thomas Muller, who has been linked with Manchester United before. The Timo Werner one has been flying around in the past few weeks as well. Whether Manchester United could be able to do a deal whereby it will be a loan with an option, because unless he is a longer-term target for Erik ten Hag and he's be willing to spend bigger money on someone like Timo Werner. The other player that's been floating around as well is Serhou Guirassy from Stuttgart. I was looking at some of his numbers. He's been absolutely incredible so far this season. I think something like 19 goals in 18 appearances in the Bundesliga so far this season in all competitions. You also remember he's 27 years old.
Yeah,
he has got a release clause, we think, of around 17 million euros. So it wouldn't actually be a huge risk. It's just whether Manchester United see him as somebody, as a longer term player at United, or maybe he would fit that mold whereby you could take a bit of that pressure of Rasmus Højlund. But it's definitely an area that Manchester United are looking at. And I think maybe in the central defensive area as well, United will probably try and recruit, be it a longer term target or somebody that they can bring in on a short term basis.
Well, in terms of centre-backs, as you mentioned there, Tidibo's a name that's been mentioned. There's been a few other names mentioned. Do you think there's a sort of a hierarchy of who United want? And do you think the Tidibo thing is helped by Jim Ratcliffe's appearance, or maybe even hindered the fact that it's Nice and it's drawing attention to this whole thing of selling and trading players between clubs? Do you think that is an option in January?
Well, what you just said about trading players between clubs who have the same ownership, it's not breaking any rules because the clubs have voted.
They voted against it, didn't they?
Yeah, and there's no problem with that. So, I mean, everyone put two and two together simply because Tidibo was actually someone that United looked at in the summer transfer window as well. Remember when Harry Maguire was on the verge of joining West Ham United? There was the likes of Benjamin Pavard and also Tidibo were being looked at. In the end, neither materialised because United needed the money from the sale of Maguire to be able to go for one of these two players. Maguire has obviously stayed at the football club, but in these players hasn't rescinded. So there still is an interest in Jean-Claire Tidibo. Whether they can afford to do a deal in a January transfer window, you'd have to say there's a huge question mark over that. Nice are fighting near the top of Ligue 1. So they, like I said before, it's very difficult doing business in a January transfer window. But United do obviously have an interest in the player. But I think Erik ten Hag, whenever he's asked the question about January recruitment, the one thing he always says is the number of players, the number of injured players that will be coming back in January. And I think we need to factor that in as well, because the injuries, and I keep harking back to them, they've decimated United's season so far, but slowly but surely you might see in January where the timetable of fixtures isn't so taxing for United. Of course, not through, out of choice. They obviously still want to be in the EFL Cup. That hasn't happened. So they haven't got any of those fixtures. And it's just a case of playing an FA Cup tie against Wigan and Tottenham in the Premier League. That's their January. Yeah. So it could be an opportunity for United to really reset, get all of these injured players back, and give Erik ten Hag an opportunity to work with them on the training ground, because some of them, their pre-season would have been interrupted as well. I'm sure Erik ten Hag has always had a way that he wanted to play. And you could argue, has he been able to do that with all of the injuries he's had effectively since he's taken over at that club?
Yeah, it's been ridiculous, isn't it? We had it on the podcast yesterday. We had that graphic, I don't know if you saw it, of the most points accrued of all the teams in the top 5 leagues. I think that's including, knockout games accounting for 3 points for a win. And United were in there, but the main reason we're in there is because we played 66 games, which is as many as City played in the last 12 months. And you think our squad and the injuries we've had to that squad has made it even smaller. No wonder we've got so many injuries now, because we've not been able to rest players, because our goal difference has been plus 22 in that time, I think. Yeah. So many of those games were tight, close games where you can't take your big players off and all that. So these injuries, they're almost, I think personally, a sort of a reflection of the sort of success we had last year and that we played so many games.
You could argue City have had a slight drop-off after the treble because they played so many fixtures. Yeah. They're starting to come back now, obviously. But if you look at last season, the number of games United played, and you had that unique situation where in the middle of that season, you had a World Cup.
I know.
If you look back to the previous season, Liverpool played every single fixture that there was possible to play in their season.
Yeah.
They got to 3 finals, so they played in all of the games in the Champions League, in the League Cup, in the FA Cup, and obviously every single game in the Premier League as well. Manchester United effectively did the same, bar 3 games in the Europa League, but you could argue they played 2 extra because they were in that bizarre playoff last ground. 32 phase. Yeah, exactly. So if you add all of that, potentially, you're going to get these injuries, and the managers keep talking about it. And that's one of the reasons they were really like, is this World Cup in the middle of the season going to work?
Yeah.
Well, at the time they were saying, well, no, it's fine because you got a little bit of a break before, you got a little bit of a break after. But for clubs like United, who effectively played every single game without any rest, you're going to have an issue the following season whereby some of these players are going to be able to cope.
I know. And then obviously you factor in that, the average sort of stoppage time has probably doubled in the last 12 months as well, post World Cup. And then you add in the fact that United, 8 or 9 pre-season games, I think more or as many as anyone else. Like it was, I mean, it's crazy. And in terms of the effect and impact of all these games, I don't know if he's not played that many, so I wouldn't necessarily say it is that. But some of the fallout, players like Jadon Sancho, who, in the midst of all of this, when you think he would have had so many opportunities, 66 opportunities in the last 12 months to play for Manchester United, he sat, training with the reserves, tweeting about how the managers made him a scapegoat. Some reports are suggesting that Sancho might be out in January, just any excuse to get rid of him like we did with Cristiano Ronaldo last year. Others saying he's sort of biding his time, hoping Ten Hag gets sacked, seeing if he can rejuvenate his career at United. What's your understanding of the Sancho situation?
I mean, first of all, the timing of it was incredible, wasn't it? I was just looking up when that game was. The United-Arsenal game was September the 3rd. So that's 2 days after the window is closed. And then you have a situation whereby manager and player, there's a bad relationship. Now, this has continued for the last 3 or 4 months, and there's no sign, as it stands, of a reconciliation between Erik Ten Hag and Jadon Sancho. Now, at the time, the immediate thought was January will be the time where Jadon Sancho will part ways with Manchester United. Yeah. But in the interim period, we've seen the situation whereby there's been the 25% investment from Ineos. And part of that, even though it hasn't been fully ratified by the Premier League, we expect it to happen, is even if they haven't formally rubber stamped that 25%, any incomings, outgoings, contract situations, loan moves, coaching changes, managerial changes, if anything needs to get done in this January transfer window, it has to go through the consultation process of Ineos. So that might kind of delay any kind of decision on Jadon Sancho. There is tentative interest in the player from home and abroad as well, maybe even Saudi Arabia. But any decision that will have to be made with the consultation of Ineos. So you could see a situation whereby Sancho could yet remain a Manchester United player by the end of the month, because Ineos, and I'm sure Manchester United will look at the situation as well. A player that they chased not for that summer that United bought him, but they were chasing him for the season before as well. Yeah. They put all their energy into trying getting Jadon Sancho to the football club. It obviously hasn't worked out for whatever reason. But now you've got a situation where you've got a £73 million asset. They need to think about it because, some of the biggest criticisms you could aim at Manchester United is not so much the money that they spend, who they spend it on, but when they come to sell players, they seem to be really, really bad at selling players and making money on players. I can't remember you can count on one hand the number of times they've made any kind of profit on any kind of player in the last 4 or 5 years. So that is the problem that Manchester United have got, and something I'm sure that they will have to look at with regard to this Jadon Sancho situation. Are they willing just to say £73 million, we're just going to have to write it off? Or are they going to be in a situation whereby they think, you know what, someone in Ineos may come into the picture and say, look, Erik, Jadon, sit down. We need to get this resolved. We still think that Jadon Sancho is an asset, or they could go the other way. Erik, you're right. It's time just to cut the losses and let him go. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens. It might not even come to a head in this transfer window. That's the only thing. But suffice to say that there is interest in him.
You've got to think United are looking to do something there, because, like you said, there doesn't seem to be any sign that this sort of feud is going away. And if we don't get rid of him now, there's a chance that he hasn't played for United for close to 8 months by the time the summer transfer window opens. What a ridiculous scenario that would be. This guy who's sort of third or fourth highest paid player at the club, one of United's highest and most expensive ever signings, hasn't played any football in 8 months. And that, for me, again, this is just my opinion, surely a loan till the end of the season somewhere else would make so much sense.
That would look like the sensible option, whereby United could send him on loan, hope he performs really, really well on loan to kind of maintain some sort of valuation for when the summer transfer window comes along. Or, you keep him on loan and maybe just have that small chink of light where you think a reconciliation could happen. But the way it looks at the moment, if there was going to be a reconciliation, you would have thought there would have been some kind of movement in the last 4 months. There's been absolutely nothing at all. Yeah,
ridiculous. Another question, you mentioned obviously Jim Ratcliffe coming in, and that's been the sort of the kind of undercurrent throughout this whole conversation. In terms of Ratcliffe, he's obviously known as a sort of ruthless businessman. His dealings in sport and in business have sort of suggested that. Ten Hag is having a pretty poor season as United manager. Do you think that his job is being questioned at the moment? Do you think that we could see a change in terms of the manager before the end of the season?
It's a good question. Of course, results are going to be what decides Erik ten Hag's future, and they're not going very well at the moment. You just don't know what you're going to get from 1 week to the next from Manchester United. Gary Neville sums it up perfectly, doesn't he? When he looked at the Villa game, he could see, wow, look how they performed there. But he could actually see them going to Nottingham Forest and losing. And lo and behold, what happens 3 days after a performance like that, they get beaten at the City ground. So he is going to get judged by results. But I think what Ineos will want to do is just get their feet under the table once this 25% investment has been ratified. Once they've got their foot under the table, I think they need to look at the whole of the club. That's what they want to do, not least the manager, the coaching staff, the recruitment situation, and the players. So I think they want to just take a step back and see where they can make, we keep hearing these two words, don't we? Marginal gains, where they can make those marginal gains for the rest of the season, and then potentially reassess everything in the summer to see whether there has been mitigating circumstances for how Erik ten Hag and the team have performed so far this season. Gary Neville mentioned it yesterday. This next 6 months looks like an audition for Erik ten Hag. So it's going to be very, very interesting to see if he does enough to pass that audition. It is going to come down to results, but I think there are other pressing needs at Manchester United that Ineos are going to have to look at, not least a sporting director. Maybe one, maybe two, and maybe getting the recruitment and the technical side of that football club right. Because since David Gill and Sir Alex Ferguson left, they haven't really addressed that situation in a way whereby they've got that recruitment right. Because the proof is in the numbers. They've spent all of this money. A handful of these signings have worked. And yet when it comes to trying to sell these players, they simply haven't been able to do it. So that's, I think, the most crucial area that Ineos will want to look at, almost at the top of the footballing operation side of the club, and then work their way down on that. And Erik ten Hag obviously is going to come very close to the top of their thinking. And I think the next 6 months will probably dictate what they're going to do with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, thank you so much for coming on, Dharmesh. We'll hear from you again throughout the transfer window, giving us those updates. Let us know what's going on, whether United are going to get a new striker, a new centre-back, whatever else we're looking at this summer. make sure, obviously, you check out Stretford Paddock. We'll be bringing you all of the latest news on that. Thank you very much for coming on, Dharmesh.
No problem. See you next week.
See you in a bit.